Undaunted by the rain, these skeletons, who are now all staring at the paladin,
I would be too.
sort of turn back and look over their shoulders toward that mound of rocks, behind which you see a couple figures hiding, poking their heads up with kind of wide-eyed, stunned expressions on their faces.
Hello, my friends. So we are setting the Wayback Machine for the late 1980s, before heavy metal music turned teenagers into satanic worshippers, and even before the satanic panic of the 90s. There was the Dungeons & Dragons moral panic. If you are unfamiliar with what Dungeons & Dragons the role-playing game actually is, I have provided a link to the basics below. With that said, let's roll up a new character, because we are exploring the realm of fantasy role-playing in this video on the dangers of Dungeons & Dragons. I hope you enjoy. I'd like to give a special thank you to my Patreons. I upload videos every Wednesday, and if you'd like to be notified of when I upload, be sure to hit the notification bell. Please like and share this video.
We've got a great opportunity this evening to have a minister. Ken is a youth minister at the Free Methodist Church in Terre Haute, Indiana, and Ken had some involvement with Dungeons & Dragons.
I love how having involvement with something suddenly makes that person an expert.
And it's our great privilege to have Ken here to talk about this from not only a Christian perspective, but the perspective of actually being involved in it. Now, Ken, what a lot of people really need to understand is that Dungeons & Dragons is not a board game like Monopoly.
No,
now, just how it could really be called a mind game.
Or, better yet, let's call it what it is, a fantasy role-playing game.
One participant, I'm sorry, I was not close enough to the microphone. It requires a minimum of 2 participants. The first participant is a dungeon master. The dungeon master's role is precisely, to be quite honest, is the role of an impartial god.
Yeah, I know some DMs who think they are gods. They do control all aspects of a world that the player character interacts with, so yeah, you could say they are gods of an imaginary world in their own mind.
The dungeon master, what he does is he decides what occurs. He was probably, or more likely than not in all cases, but more likely than not, he was the creator of the world that you're going to adventure through. And his creation is strictly out of his own imagination, and he determines what occurs basically by the roll of the dice.
Never in my entire life have I heard somebody make Dungeons & Dragons sound as boring as you just did. This makes me wonder, when kids started playing hopscotch, like before we had TV or radio, did evangelicals such as David and Ken make a claim that it was demonic or evil that the kids were jumping on and desecrating the cross? Good Lord, those kids are jumping on the cross and laughing about it.
What monsters you might run into, what kind of monsters you run into, when you run into them, where you run into them, what kind of environment you're in, if you're outdoors or if you're in a dungeon, or if you're inside a palace or in a tavern. And he's basically controls everything as far as the direction of the game. And
yeah, but at least they aren't defiling the sacred image of Christendom and laughing about it. It's not hopscotch.
So he creates this world. It could be like in World War II in Nazi Germany, and I could be Adolf Hitler, and you could be, it's all in the mind.
Tell me he did not just create a Hitler analogy to Dungeons and Dragons. No. If someone wants to play a military game set in Nazi Germany during World War II, Dungeons & Dragons might not be the best genre suited for it. Most people playing D&D want to play an elven wizard or gnome thief who slay dragons and explore fantastical worlds.
Sure.
And he creates this world for you.
Well, chances are it won't be in Germany. It won't be in Nazi Germany. But in some twist, if he wanted to have a weird twist on the game, he could somehow resurrect Adolf Hitler or maybe put this game back in history sometime, and have Adolf Hitler teleported through another plane into his dimension, and you could play a game as Adolf Hitler if the DM wanted that.
Yeah, that's what I want my gnome illusionist thief doing, carrying out a military raid for the Third Reich or overseeing a concentration camp. Gee, that sounds like fun.
See, the DM, or the Dungeon Master, that's short for Dungeon Master, is the omniscient, omnipresent, and omnipotent, and usually, I say usually, honestly, impartial person, or the impartial judge of the whole game. And his job, again, is to describe everything that's going on in the game.
Yes, but he also needs to make the game interesting and fun for the players and himself. Stories need to have something driving them. Maybe a princess trapped by an evil lich king, or a dragon is rumored to have thousands of years of treasure stored up in its lair. The characters also interact with NPCs, which are non-player characters, and the choices made by the characters impact the world around them. Their actions and deeds also affect the people and characters they will encounter and how they are judged.
So after he creates this world for you, and he creates the battle scene, more or less, or the scenario,
Mm-hmm.
and you are like visualizing this in your mind. Is that right?
It's all, basically, yes. The whole scene is played out in your mind. You have the option of seeing what he's telling you in your own way.
Yes, that's why it's called a fantasy game.
Now, a lot of people, it doesn't come with a board, but you can have maps. He can give you maps to show you where you're at, or you can have these lead figurines that are exorbitantly expensive.
Lead figurines were not very expensive. In my day, we used coins to represent ourselves and monsters we encountered. Dimes were pretty easy, quarters a little more difficult. Now, if the DM whipped out a silver dollar, run.
To place yourself on the map so you can get a better visual of where you're at. But basically, yes, it's all played out in the mind.
Yes, a fantasy game.
And anybody that studied the occult knows that visualization will lead to the altered state, and this is truly the doorway to the occult.
This is crazy. This is literally crazy. Are you people insane?
Do some people just not have an imagination? Sometimes I wonder about that. Does David and Ken just completely lack the ability to imagine and create thoughts and images in their own mind? Do they, just by some unfortunate genetic roll of the dice, not have this ability?
So when you were playing, from your experience, would it be correct to say that
It is so weird to hear people talk about a fantasy game with such analytical language.
while you were playing, after he created this scenario, could you like see it in your mind, like you'd be watching television in your mind in a visualization type thing?
I'm pretty convinced they have no concept of what fantasy is or how the imagination works. Yes, David, people can imagine things in their mind and also be well aware it is pure fantasy.
Yeah, now I'm speaking for myself. I can't speak for all players, but in my case, it was as if I was in a movie. And I was playing, and I was writing the part as we went along. I was writing my part as we went along. And my personality, and my thoughts, and my feelings were focused on my character.
You are supposed to enjoy playing the game. The players range from very involved role-playing all the way through to more hack-and-slash types who enjoy the mechanics of the game, like combat, spellcasting, and of course, the treasure. A player may want to give a story to this character. What does he look like? Does he have a loud, boisterous voice, or is he a quiet loner who keeps to himself? What's his motivation? All these characteristics are imagined by the player.
And in such a intense degree that when I wasn't playing, I felt like I was just, there's a part of me missing. And if something happened to my character, I felt physically ill.
Sure, people get attached to characters, but it's a game. It sounds like you had an unhealthy expectation of what would happen in this made-up fantasy world. In this game, player characters will get hurt, take damage, get poisoned, or contract disease and even die. However, they can get healed or cured of disease, and even raised from the dead. On occasion, characters will suffer a permanent death, meaning they can't be brought back.
Now, when you begin to play, I know that the instructions will tell you that you are to merge or to become one with your character. And is this kind of like an actor would try to associate with the role he would play? And
Role players are not method actors who lose their self-identity in a character. It's a playful escape into a fantasy world. Sure, some players get really into their characters, but most players just enjoy playing the game. They aren't hoping to receive an Academy Award for Best Actor's Half-Orc Barbarian in a campaign.
And did you do this to the point where you actually got physically sick when your player would be hurt?
Oh, my character was everything I wanted to be. I lived a life of adventure and power vicariously through my character.
You are not supposed to live vicariously through your made-up fantasy character. It's a game. I know you are playing off the fears of parents back in the 80s of teenagers getting depressed and allegedly suicidal after playing Dungeons & Dragons, but this nonsense is unfounded. Studies by the American Association of Suicide, the U.S. Centers for Disease Control, and Health and Welfare Canada all found no causal link between D&D and suicide.
And let me read to you what the Dungeon Master's guy said. This is an instruction to a Dungeon Master, and it's called Giving the Players What They Want. And it says, players in most advanced Dungeons & Dragons games play the same character over many game sessions. Most players develop strong ties to their characters and get a huge thrill.
No, they get a thrill, not a huge thrill. I know, I'm a stickler for accuracy.
From watching them advance and grow and become more successful and powerful. It was everything to me. This was my religion.
You are either hyping this up, hoping to scare your audience, or you had a very unhealthy relationship with this game.
A lot of your game success depends on how much your players care about their characters. For these reasons, it is important to let each player create the type of character he really wants to play. Therefore, before any player in your game creates his first character,
and this is where he purposely misquotes the DM's guide.
You need to let him decide what he wants to be and how he wants to act out this character. Because if you give him something he don't want to do, then how can he get attached to it? And how can he enjoy the game? So part of enjoying the game is being linked almost spiritually to your character.
I don't know from which book you allegedly got this quote, but I found a first edition and a second edition of the AD&D Dungeon Master's Guide, and found the text you partially quoted. After, therefore, everything else you spoke of was not in the first edition, nor in the second edition. Why are you misquoting this? Are you trying to make it seem like players are more involved than they actually are in their characters? Are you trying to make it sound like they have an unhealthy ability to distinguish fantasy from reality? Now, why on earth would you want to do that? This section speaks of the dice method, which gives the players their ability scores, and the DM guide suggests not allowing the characters to become too powerful and out of balance. It's not role-playing advice.
Now, it's called a role-playing game, and role-playing is a term that therapists would use.
I'm not sure how many therapists incorporate role-playing in their therapy practice. I am sure it has its application in specific scenarios. In Dungeons & Dragons, the role-playing is an element that can enhance the player's enjoyment, but it's not a requirement.
And a therapist will use role-playing in therapy to try to modify people's behavior. Now, as you associated, as you said, you were so into it, associating with your character that you even got physically sick when your character would not do well in the game.
So that people who play gnome illusionist thieves are having their personalities modified through role-playing? Is that why I have an obsession with gems and prestidigitation? I got an idea. Why don't therapists prescribe hour-long Dungeons & Dragons sessions where their patients role-play lawful good clerics who are God-fearing monotheists? Surely, according to your assumption, this would modify their behavior, right?
Did it affect your behavior from playing D&D?
Drastically, in fact.
Did you often play a lying, deceitful shill? Because that's what you've become.
And I look back on it now and realize how ridiculous I must have been. I had one Christian friend out of all my friends, and he kept warning me. He said, "Now this game is going to mess you up," and I didn't listen to him, and I kept playing. And what happened to me was basically I began to lie without thinking about it. I lied about things to get out of trouble or to get past things.
How do you lie without thinking about it? Did you just consciously say stuff you did not know was wrong? People can repeat things they assume are correct and later they find out they are wrong, but that is not really lying. It's more like perpetuating false information. To lie, you would have to knowingly and consciously mischaracterize or misrepresent a fact, like knowingly misquoting a piece of text from a book. Now that would be a lie.
When I was normally, before that, I was a pretty honest kid. And my dad would catch me making weapons out of garden tools. I'd take maybe a weed, an old-fashioned weed whacker, and I'd straighten it out and sharpen it up, and I'd have a scimitar.
Oh, okay, so like normal kid stuff.
And this was because
I wanted
the weapons in the game.
Yeah,
and you were acting it out in real life, actually making
what I
weapons.
wanted more than anything. See, I played a thief most of the time.
David is so desperate to further this false narrative that role-playing causes people to lose their grip with reality. It is so transparent. He speaks over him, claiming Ken was acting it out in real life by creating a weed whacker scimitar. Children make toy props like weapons all the time to play with.
Because, a thief, you can steal stuff. That's your job. You steal stuff. Your job is to rob people, and your job is to take from people to get your booty and everything. And so I thought, I got to the point where I had magic items that helped me steal.
Thieves have an important role in D&D. They can search and find traps, secret doors, open locks, sneak, and yes, backstab enemies.
And I never wanted to steal. Let me make that straight. I never stole, thank goodness.
You never stole anything in the fantasy game? Or in real life. Stealing in D&D as a thief is expected. Stealing in real life has consequences.
But one thing I did do was one of the things I wanted more than anything was to have big daggers and big swords. And I wanted a suit of armor.
Who doesn't want to have big swords? Thieves should not wear plate armor. Don't you know what kind of a penalty wearing heavy armor incurs? You must have been a really lousy thief running around wearing plate armor and swinging your great two-handed sword.
I wanted all this medieval stuff because I wanted to live the game. I went to the convention they have every year in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. It's called GenCon, which is short for Lake Geneva Convention. And this was where the game was originated by a man named E. Gary Gygax, who happened to be a historian of war games and things like that.
Ken, if I can ask you...
Ken. You are not here to explain historical details of D&D's development. David needs you to talk bad about it and explain how this game ruined your life.
In this game, and this is just amazing to me, in this game, the characters will actually rape and kill and mutilate and commit other atrocities, all in the fantasy. Now, and you were to the point where you were actually, I never knew, Ken, that you actually made a weapon out of a weed whacker.
I mean,
now when you make a weapon out of a weed whacker, you're getting pretty bizarre.
That's pretty mild compared to what the other stuff I did.
Players can roleplay their characters however they like within the confines of the world the DM has created. If some player wants to fantasize raping and maiming monsters in a dungeon, I guess they could do that, but that would really not be fun for everyone.
But did this ever, and certainly you see the indications to where this is moving you toward acting out real violence, and certainly it did with Bink pulling and many other people we could mention.
I don't know the case with Fink pulling. I am aware of a case with Irving pulling. Pulling was a depressed teenager who took his own life, and his mother blamed Dungeons and Dragons for her son's death. In reaction to his death, she created Bad, bothered about Dungeons and Dragons. However, no conclusive study shows any correlation between teen suicide and playing Dungeons and Dragons. In 1982, high school student Irving Lee Pulling died after shooting himself in the chest. Despite an article in the Washington Post at the time commenting how Pulling had trouble fitting in, Mother Patricia Pulling believed her son's suicide was caused by him playing D&D. It was not clear that more complex psychological factors were at play. A classmate of Irving Pulling commented that he had a lot of problems anyway that weren't associated with the game. At first, Patricia Pulling attempted to sue her son's high school principal, claiming the curse placed upon her son's character during a game run by the principal was real.
Like, what? What?
She also sued TSR Incorporated, the publishers of D&D. Despite the court dismissing these cases, Pulling continued her campaign by forming Bothered About Dungeons and Dragons, or BADD, in 1983. Pulling described D&D as a fantasy role-playing game which uses demonology, witchcraft, voodoo, murder, rape, blasphemy, suicide, assassination, insanity, sex perversion, homosexuality, prostitution, satanic-type rituals, gambling, barbarism, cannibalism, sadism, desecration, demon summoning, necromantics, divination, and other teachings. A lot of math, to be quite honest, and a lot of writing, and a lot of history, and a lot of acting. But I digress. If this is the case David is referring to, it was determined that there was no causal link between D&D and suicide.
But do you know of cases in your experience where it actually led to violence on your part of the ones that you played with?
Well, it's funny you should ask that. Actually, I was a victim of a violent attack during a D&D game. I had a roommate from college, and I won't mention his name because he still is a friend of mine, and I love him dearly. And but we were playing Dungeons and Dragons, and he was a novice, and all the rest of us were experienced players. And so one thing we did to initiate people was to kill them, and then after they got killed, we'd make fun of them. You know, we'd take their first character and off it, and we'd make fun of them.
What a stupid thing to do! Immediately killing the character of a novice player by your own teammates? How is he going to enjoy the game when he's dead? How idiotic is that? That's a good way to get them turned off from ever playing with you again. Ken, you were kind of an asshole.
Well, he was getting on my nerves, so I thought I'd do it early. And I kept warning him that if he didn't bother me, I was going to kill his character. Well, he didn't quit, so I killed him. Well, the second I killed him, you know, we all started making fun of him. Well, the next thing I knew, everything on the table we were playing on was thrown across the room, scattered all over the place, and the man jumped up and went right for me. He started to attack me, and he was throwing his fists at me, and he didn't hit me, luckily, and he was kicking at me. And somehow I got in a position where I could, I thought I was holding him back. I had my arms around his one arm and then my other arm around his face. Well, he bit me, and he bit me good and hard. And if he would have bit clean through it, it took about a half, I don't know, maybe, I can't even measure what the weight would be, but it bit a big old hunk of flesh out of my arm. And I still have scars. I still have teeth marks in my arm. And after that, I knocked him on the floor, and that whole incident took place in about, I don't know, maybe, the whole attack took place in about 10 seconds.
Ken, you got into a physical altercation with another player over a stupid decision that you made while playing a game of Dungeons and Dragons. I do not see how your actions should reflect badly on the Dungeons and Dragons game.
But
And what is the thing that we want to really impress, and to the young people that might be listening in, but also to the parents. And just like Bink Pulling,
I have no idea who Fink Pulling is.
his parents did not know what he was involved in. And I know I cannot keep up with all of the stuff that comes out. This group, 9 Inch Nails, that came in, I didn't know anything about them, and I found out some things that were just unbelievable.
Oh no. What happens if kids start playing Dungeons and Dragons while listening to 9 Inch Nails? Oh dear God, it's the perfect storm.
But we need to find out what our children and young people are involved in and the dangers. This is literally a game that can take a college student and make him go berserk to where he's biting people. Yeah, and this should alert us that we've got some real dangers.
No, the game had nothing to do with Ken's obnoxious behavior, which led to his friend biting him. That was all Ken.
Well,
Now, Ken, isn't it a fact that Dungeons and Dragons, in the playing of this game, you use actual occult spells?
Are you insane?
Oh my. You have got to be fucking kidding me. Okay, Davey, what occult spell?
oh yeah, you use spells, all right. And let me read something a little bit. A friend of mine wanted to know where it says in the Bible that you can't play Dungeons and Dragons. And I found it, and I'll read it to you right now. It's in 2 Thessalonians, and it is the last chapter, or 1 Thessalonians, I'm sorry. 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, starting with verse 15, it says,
Oh, yeah. Here it is. Thou shalt not play the TSR role-playing game known as Dungeons and Dragons or Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. I never knew that before.
See that none render evil for evil unto any man, but ever follow that which is good, both among yourselves and to all men. Rejoice evermore, pray without ceasing, and everything give thanks, for this is the will of God in Christ Jesus concerning you. Quench not the spirit, despise not the prophecies, prove all things, hold fast that which is good, abstain from all appearance of evil, and the very God of peace sanctify you wholly. And I pray God your whole spirit and soul and body be preserved blameless unto the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ. That says to abstain from even the appearance of evil. And I want to share with you some things that look like evil to me that are involved with this game. In the Old Testament, or throughout the whole Bible, the art of divination is called blasphemous.
You do realize that interpreting ancient texts and applying it to modern-day events is a form of divination. You are interpreting text written prior to an event, like the creation of this RPG, and reading it as a predictive warning. That is divination.
Sorcery is called an abomination. Witchcraft is called an abomination. And Galatians 5:19 through 21, witchcraft is labeled among the workings of the flesh, and necromancy is called an abomination in Deuteronomy 18:11 through 12.
Players are not speaking with the dead or casting ritual spells during a fantasy role-playing game, you idiot. The players don't actually draw a magic circle on the floor and start chanting in ancient Latin. They tell the DM, I cast Speak with Dead or I cast Fireball, and the DM rolls dice to see the effect, and then he relays what happens to the players.
Now there are some schools of magic for magic users in Dungeons and Dragons. The spells that they cast in Dungeons and Dragons, I'm going to say D&D for shortness sake, are divided into 9 different categories or schools according to the types of magic or magical energy. This is beginning to sound like New Age already.
Are these the actual occult spells you mentioned earlier? I haven't found Aleister Crowley's magic missile spell yet. Maybe it's in his older writings.
And each school has its own special practices. Now the schools are abjuration, alteration, conjuring, and summoning.
And you're talking about demons, conjuring,
Conjuring demons.
Without getting too nerdy and explaining everything for my audience, I'm assuming most of you are sort of familiar with Dungeons & Dragons. If you aren't, I put a link below to a website about the game. Each type of spell is placed in a category such as illusion, evocation, conjuration, etc.
Enchantment and charm, greater divination, divining spirits, illusion, invocation or evocation, necromancy, which is communication with the dead, and lesser divination. Now, some of these spells I want to get into with you here.
And these, if my child would go play D&D, this would be one of the spells he could very well use. Is this right?
If he decided to role-play a spellcaster, yes, he would, Dave. But first, he would have to sacrifice a virgin to Orcus.
Yeah, these are some spells. Now, these are clerical spells. A cleric is a holy man. Let me give you the classes, first of all, so you can understand what I'm talking about.
These guys are ruining my childhood.
You can choose what kind of character you're going to be. You can be a fighter, you can be a magic user, you can be a thief, or you can be a cleric. And there are a lot of other subclasses that we haven't got time to get into. But let me read you a little bit from each of these, from a couple of these spells. This is a divination spell, and it's called No Alignment, which K-N-O-W alignment. And alignment is whether if you're good or evil or neutral. And a no alignment spell enables the priest to exactly read the aura of a creature or an aligned object, such as a sword, if it has intelligence and alignment. The caster must remain stationary and concentrate on the subject for a full round if the creature rolls a successful saving throw versus spell. And if he does this, the caster doesn't learn anything. But see, this is already showing you how to do this spell.
It's all communicated between the players and the DM. A player playing a cleric would tell the DM, I cast no alignment, and then the DM tells the player what happens. They don't actually go into some altered state and try and read auras. It's a fantasy role-playing game. Which part of the statement do you not understand? The fantasy part or the role-playing part?
Another one here called Spiritual Hammer is the invocation spell. And to get this spell, to do the Spiritual Hammer, you have to call on your deity. And then the spell will bring into existence a force field shaped vaguely like a hammer. Now, it also gives, along with this, telling you how to do it, it gives you the material components, or what you need to cast this spell. And the material components for a spiritual hammer is a normal war hammer that the priest must hurl towards an opponent while uttering a plea to his deity. And there's a couple other spells here, like Slow Poison, which is a necromantic spell. And different kinds of spells. It tells you what school they're from, so you can basically, the DM and the player can know how to protect himself against it.
Oh, well, that clinches it. I mean, all throughout occult books, they speak of material components you will need to cast spells from the school of conjuration, and what to say to a deity as you hurl your warhammer at a group of ogres. Just the other day, I was reading an occult book and realized I was missing a material component. I needed to cast Fireball. Sure, Crowley had a great spell for Lightning Bolt, but, I just prefer Fireball.
So what we're talking about is the whole smorgasbord of black arts.
The whole smorgasbord of the black arts? I am going to put that on a fucking t-shirt.
That the Bible tells us is an abomination unto God. And as Christian parents, there's no way that we could allow our children to partake in this. And you mentioned, Ken, in your reading there about a deity. Now, isn't it true that everyone that plays D&D, they have to serve a pagan deity?
Like, what the hell? What is this? Like, what? What?
Well, to be honest, they don't have to. There's no rule saying you have to. But if you don't serve one of the deities, one of the many plethora of deities, among which are the Chaldean deities and the Babylonian deities and different non-human deities. If you don't choose a deity, if you get killed, you can't get resurrected by the deity if he chooses to resurrect you.
Depending on the rules of the fantasy world created by the Dungeon Master, clerics can raise dead, certain magic items can raise dead, and yes, if it fits the story and the fantasy world, a deity can raise a character from death. In that scenario, yes, if a cleric did not have a deity, the character would not be able to call favor from it.
So there's a lot of paganism involved with this too. You learn a lot about pagan deities and a lot of mythological things and different things like that.
The only book that had various pantheons of gods from many cultures was a book titled Deities and Demigods. And yes, there were gods and heroes and even some creatures from mythology in it that DMs could use to create a fantasy world based on, say, Greek mythology or on the King Arthur legends. One print even had the Cthulhu mythos before it was edited out over a copyright claim. Now, if you were concerned about your kid being exposed to other mythologies as a DM, you could create a whole campaign around the Judaic history of the Bible and make God or Yahweh the single deity.
Now, Ken, would it be fair to say that there would be a great possibility of a young person becoming obsessed with this? And what kind of a person would be attracted to D&D? And what would be the dangers of just going berserk in this?
Is there a great possibility of a person becoming obsessed with D&D, or the chances of them going berserk? No, it would not be fair to ask that, David. Why do you and Ken have such a hate boner for Dungeons and Dragons?
I want to say right now that I think Dungeons and Dragons is an emotional, mental, and spiritual narcotic.
Are you kidding me? Hooked on D&D? Is this becoming a theme on my channel?
It is very easy to get obsessed with something like this because it's not just a game. It's not just something you go and play like Monopoly or you don't just play it like a game of euchre.
Euchre? I've never heard of euchre, and I'm a freaking boomer. I had to do a Google search to find out what it was. It's a card game, by the way, for those wondering. If that's your thing, have at it. Personally, I prefer playing a half-orc barbarian in a fantasy world where magic is wielded by elven sorcerers and where dragons rule the skies.
This game involves your entire being. It's a spiritual game. It involves your intellect, your desires. And the reason it can be so entrancing is because in this game, you get pretty much, if you play it right, you get what you want.
Yep, if what you want is entertainment.
You get power that you don't have normally. You get riches that you don't have normally.
In a fantasy game.
And, if the kind of person that would play this was probably someone who that it was a lot like I was. Someone who likes to do a lot of research, likes to read, but doesn't have a lot of friends maybe, or someone who's lonely, or someone who desires to have something meaningful in their life but doesn't know the Lord. I know a lot of Christians who go to Christian college who play this game, and they try to justify it. But people who play this game tend to be people who are very intellectual and who like philosophy and like to do research, because the game involves philosophy. And if you don't like to read and do research, then you'll hate this game, because that's a lot of what you do. But someone who likes adventure too.
Really? That's horrible.
So it definitely takes up a lot of your time. How about money? How much money can you spend getting into D&D?
It only costs
Your eternal soul.
Sorry, I was summoning demons earlier and one of them must have stayed behind. Damn it, where'd that little devil go?
You can spend more money than you got. Let me tell you right now. When I went to GenCon, I spent $60 in about 10 minutes once, just getting books.
Yeah, the books were expensive, but often friends would all pitch in or buy different books, so we had a whole set for our campaign. Personally, I bought all the books. Not all at once, but over time as they came out.
And I would, you can go into a bookstore. The typical book, like the DM guide, my player's handbook right here. This player's handbook was put out in 1989, and I have it in my hands right here. It's a pretty, it's not a very big book, but it's a pretty good size. It was $20 in 1989, and this is one of about, 6 books that you can get that you really need to have to play the game.
In a pinch, all you really need was the DM's guide, but most core campaigns had at least the DM's guide, the player's guide, and of course the monster manual. You could buy what were called modules that are a predetermined world in which for the characters to interact, but we often just created our own campaigns.
And then you have dice. The cost of dice can run anywhere from $2 to $10. Then you have character cards, then you can make your own, but they have prefabricated character cards that probably can run you about $5. And then you have lead figures that can go anywhere from $3 to $15. And I mean, there's just lots of stuff you can just blow your money on.
Damn capitalism, always trying to sell me what I want. Yes, you can buy character sheets and lead figures and all those fun little additions. They did sell a box set called the Red Box, and it had everything you needed to play the game. Granted, it only took characters from levels 1 through 3, but it was a great introduction to the game.
So once you become really hooked, we might say, on D&D, it's something that will eat up your time, and you could spend hundreds or even thousands of dollars on this stuff, it sounds like.
Just like any other hobby or game, you can invest a lot or just a little, depending on how much time and money you want to invest for your entertainment return.
My brother and I together spent about $300 at one GenCon.
How hard is it to get D&D? How available is it? You know, how much of it is there out there?
Any bookstore, retail bookstore you go into probably has it. You can probably find someone in your school that plays it. You can probably find it at yard sales. You can probably find some books there.
How about high schools, middle schools? Do you know for a fact that some of them make it available?
David, if you are really interested, I know a guy who might be able to hook you up. But it's cash up front, no returns, and no questions. It is the best damn Dungeons and Dragons you'll ever play, though. Just don't play it too much, man. You'll get hooked.
Oh yeah, they have some books in some libraries that I've been to at schools, and I know of some D&D clubs in schools. And you know, when I was in school back in I was a sophomore in 1981, and I played Dungeons and Dragons with my chemistry teacher at school in his classroom during his prep hour.
Oh my God, it's worse than I thought.
So I know teachers who play it, and it's not hard to get at all, and it's too easy to get out. Honestly, it's too easy to get.
Too easy to get, huh? Maybe we should regulate it or raise the minimum age to buy it. You know what's really horrible? Is when there's a bad batch of D&D going around. I've heard about people playing D&D that was cut with the rules of another RPG system, like GURPS. There's no coming down from that, man. Dude thought he was playing a lawful good human paladin. Turns out it was much more complex than that. He couldn't handle the rules. He was rolling way too many dice, he cried. One day, he made a scimitar from a weed whacker, went berserk. Luckily, no one was hurt, but his front lawn was butchered beyond recognition. He went completely insane.
And Ken, we're running down on time here, but what would you say if you would just take a couple minutes? You're a youth pastor up there in Terre Haute. Say something to the kids out there that might be contemplating on getting involved in D&D.
Just say no to D&D. Jesus failed his saving throw for you.
Well, first of all, I want to tell them that Dungeons and Dragons is not something that is beneficial to them. You can justify it all you want, but your justifications will fall flat in the light of Scripture. The Bible says specifically that the things you're pretending to do in Dungeons and Dragons is an abomination, and that this brings nothing but problems. You'll be denying yourself blessings from God by playing this game, and you should really consider what God has to say about some of the things you're doing. And I'd encourage them to read their Bible specifically about things that they do in Dungeons and Dragons, especially the magic and the spiritual side of it.
And we just want to really thank Ken so much for coming on today and sharing with us from his knowledge and perspective. And we really count it a privilege to be able to give a warning to the young people and to the parents out there. And I encourage you to check and see if your middle school and your high school is making this stuff available to your children. And do a little checking into it and find out if what we're telling you is true. And this is just, believe me, scratching the surface of the things that Brother Ken could share. And Ken is going to be speaking in more detail at our Standing in the Gap conference coming up on Saturday, March 25th at Victory Chapel, Church of the Nazarene. And as always, we're just very thankful to be with you. And until next week, this is Dave Carrico standing in the gap. God bless you.
Well, thanks, Ken and David, for spreading fear and misrepresenting a much-loved and appreciated game from my childhood. I won't be attending your Stick It in Your Gap conference, but I am sure it will be a wonderful evangelical masturbatory event celebrating self-righteousness and elitism. Until next time, I will see you in hell, you heathens.